Maggie Cohen. We are very privileged to have Maggie. She is a friend of Games and she's very involved in one of our current trainings, which we'll talk about a little bit just now. But maybe, Maggie, maybe just to start, you can tell us, you worked for many years in a neonatal ICU in London, is that right?
Yes.
Maybe you could tell us how you came to work there and kind of what transpired.
Okay. So before that, I worked in a children's hospital, Great Ormond Street, which is quite a big children's hospital in London. And I think I was sort of looking for something different. And suddenly this job was advertised in what was, in a way, a less prestigious hospital. But it was for a child psychotherapist to work in a neonatal unit. And so I was quite interested in that. And what really fascinated me was that there wasn't a very worked out job description.
Would it have been an unusual position at the time, Maggie? Were a lot of people working in those kinds of units?
No, it was unusual. And this was actually brought about by a group of parents who'd been through the unit and had actually been very good at collecting money, raising money, and had provided all kinds of equipment and blessed the unit really in many ways. But the child psychiatrist who was involved said, well, why don't you buy a child psychotherapist who might, do some of the work? The parents had both raised money and thought that they would like to go back to support parents going through what they'd been through. But when they did it, I think they found it not as easy or as rewarding maybe, or more difficult, I think, than they thought. So they were very keen on the idea that maybe they could pay for somebody to do this work that they had thought they might like to do. So I entered this job in a way as the thing of the parents. And what happened was that the job was funded for 2 years by them, and then after 2 years it became a national health job. It was then after that it was funded by the health service.
So they recognised that in fact what you did was of value, obviously.
The unit did, yes. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit. I mean, obviously a large part of what you were doing then would have been around working with parents, supporting them. Can you tell us a bit about in what ways did you work with parents and in what ways was that seen to kind of be of use? Or why was it important?
That was the obvious way.
Yes.
That was the obvious thing for me to be doing.
Yes.
To be working with the parents. Well, they had a traumatic time, most of them, inevitably. Their babies were premature and very sick often. This wasn't at all what they'd been expecting. So it wasn't hard to see how they needed support. But then, of course, there were lots of other parents as well. There were babies born to drug-addicted mothers. There were babies born to mothers in prison. There were parents who had infertility treatment, so IVF. So there were people with all kinds of stories of their own that brought them to this place. And so the staff, I think, were really pleased that there was somebody around who they could direct the parents to have a chat. I suppose if I can preempt what you might ask me next.
Yes.
I came to feel that the parents were really a small part of the issues that were going on in the unit.
Right.
That there were also the staff, and what a difficult place it was to work in. What an alluring place, what a fantastically interesting place it was, and also how hard it was. That often very sad stories, and often situations that got to people. So what I noticed was that sometimes it seemed as if the doctors found it quite hard to leave the unit, to go home.
Really?
And that the sort of dedication to work, or the addiction to work, whichever it was, nurses would report that they'd gone all day without having lunch, or they'd gone all day without going for a pee. That people would forget their own needs in this place. So gradually we set up, and I say we, I sort of, I teamed up with a child psychiatrist, and we did staff support together. First of all, I tried doing it on my own, and so it was very hard to get people to come.
Yes, I'm sure.
And what I realized was it was hard for them to change gear. They were very, very busy, so to change gear and come to a meeting that was about them talking about their vulnerability was pretty hard. They were used to the babies being vulnerable or the parents being vulnerable, but to talk about their own feelings in this unit was quite difficult. And so I put aside this time when I would be in a room and they could come, whoever wanted in the staff could come, and I'd find that all kinds of, they might send the most junior people, or people that were just visiting the unit on that day, or a student that was there in a temporary way, or whatever.
Well,
the place was there, so that when an issue came up, that was there. And it would come up. It would be when something happened in the unit that people couldn't agree on.
And then they would come. In other words, is that what created an opportunity for people to almost test out what you were offering?
I think they came because it was intolerable. There might be a baby that was in a very bad way, near to death. And so in those situations, I think people would tend to polarize. So there'd be staff who would be sort of feeling everything had to be done. We're here to save life. And then there'd be other staff saying, but haven't you seen how the baby's suffering? Have you seen? This isn't tolerable. We can't go on doing this. So gradually, I think it came about that people felt this was a safe place where they could come and talk in confidence about the ethical questions that they felt confronted by. And I think that was what I came to feel about the unit, was that it throws ethical dilemmas at people. So I think we all have our kind of view of what's right and what's wrong. And most of the time, it kind of fits to what we're doing in our lives. We have a sense of that we know what we think is right and wrong, but not in the unit. It's you get these situations that are thrown up where you feel inadequate. You don't know what the answer is. And that makes people quite bad-tempered, irritable, cross with each other. And so to have a place where they could come and talk about that, I think, became a relief.
And did that slowly translate into a place where people could talk about the vulnerabilities of working with babies that were either dying or whose futures were uncertain or they weren't always able to save? Because I would imagine in some ways the nurses and doctors would have had to develop incredible defenses to keep coming back.
Yeah, terrific defenses to keep themselves at work.
Yeah.
Yes. It varied, I think, in staff support. That how much people could talk. We had all kinds of different things that we tried out. So first of all, we had nurses groups, just nurses, and they did become more able to talk about their feelings about maybe certain parents or about when we'd have a baby in that was withdrawing from heroin. Now, these babies they're on methadone, and then they're gradually weaned off methadone, and they're very hard to nurse. They're so uncomfortable, really, and they have a particular cry that's like sandpaper. And when there's a baby and it's withdrawing, people become quite edgy. And for instance, nurses might want to share the shift. If they'd got this baby on their shift, they'd say, well, okay, I'll do half the shift, you do the other half. And so this baby that was very vulnerable was getting even more carers looking after it. So then to have a place where we could talk about what was this like for the baby. And for a while we'd take the speech and language therapist would take video of babies, and then we'd have nurses groups and show the video and use it like baby observations. So we'd show a bit, and then we'd all talk about what might be going on for this baby. And the nurses showed how much they thought about the babies and how much they knew once there was a place to talk about it, how much they knew about this baby. And it was very painful for them because they might say, oh, but we shouldn't have done it like that. It would have been better for the baby if we'd done it like this. But then it led to a conversation that was about the welfare of the baby, how it could be done better, or on looking at the baby, it seems like we could support that baby more by doing it this way rather than that way. So what could be a very could be a situation that provoked paranoia, it became a situation that was very interesting because people working together could find better ways of doing things, ways that actually took the baby's experience into account.
Now, you wrote, I think, what is now considered a seminal book, kind of in terms of working therapeutically in a neonatal ICU. In fact, it was reviewed in our last newsletter, and I guess what strikes me in your book is the way that you talk about that part of your role is really to translate the baby's experience, to almost be a voice for what you're observing the babies do, you know?
Yes.
And I wondered if you couldn't talk a bit more about that as well.
I mean, in a way, that was the more difficult part of the work, because everybody see that the staff also support. So we had nurses groups, doctors groups, consultant groups, all kinds of things to help the staff. But actually watching the babies, that was more difficult. And but because I am a child psychotherapist, and I'd done a whole training in observing babies, I really wanted to observe these babies. And so I kind of began. And people find it quite odd that I'd be sitting there just looking, and they'd say, "What are you doing, Maggie? Yeah. Why did you choose that one?" Or, yeah. But also, as I observed, the nurse working with that baby would often come and tell me things. They would say, "I've seen with this baby that they do so and so and so." I began to think that when somebody was observing, the nurses valued their own observations more and became more articulate, giving words to what they knew. It was like they knew all these things inside themselves, and they could bring it out, and because it was valued.
Almost giving validity to this idea that what you observed had meaning and was important.
Yeah. And what they knew was also important. What they knew, and knew on the side of their mind. You know, it's like bringing into the center of your mind what you kind of peripherally know.
And what kinds of things did you find valuable in watching? You know, what felt important to see in terms of, you know, you talk about translating the baby's experience. What kinds of things would you observe, and in what ways would they be helpful?
I suppose it was I think it's the difficult issue about what we don't want to see, and that these babies would normally be inside, and so they're very vulnerable to their experience. So working away at trying to make sense of their movements, their breathing, the kind of trying to make a pattern of what they're doing, begins to feel a relief that they're not just, you know, floating around like flotsam and jetsam on the surface of the sea. They are little creatures that are trying to organize themselves, manage themselves. And so watching and trying to give words to what's happening for them, begins to feel a worthwhile task. And there's something very beautiful, I think, when you begin to think, there is all this going on.
And perhaps even the recognition that they are having an experience. It's
absolutely, yeah. And of course, that's double-edged because, for a long time it was thought that babies didn't feel pain. There's all kinds of things, articles in journals, medical journals, about them not feeling pain, and yet, you can see that they do have a response to experiences that they have.
I mean, maybe just to kind of say that it's quite a hard skill to watch a baby and to tolerate all the feelings that come up and to watch in detail and try and make sense of the sequence. And I say that because I've kind of had the privilege of being part of a training that you've offered, Game, where a few of us have been beginning to observe babies in a neonatal ICU, and then to kind of try and make sense of it. It's a very painful and quite a hard thing to do, but as you say, absolutely fascinating and very, very meaningful.
Yeah. Well, I think that's very honest of you. I mean, because I do think that most of the time we'd rather not observe. We'd rather do something. So there's a terrific pull to be busy rather than just to enter this baby's experience. I used to be quite envious of the doctors and nurses because they would be busy and they'd be clear what they were meant to be doing. And I'd often feel a bit embarrassed that I was sitting there just looking.
Just watching.
Yeah.
Maggie, I also had wanted to ask, in your book, there's a fascinating chapter on, you talk about integrity as being incredibly important, the concept of integrity in a neonatal ICU. And I wondered if you wouldn't talk a bit about that.
Yeah, well, I saw that you'd written this down as something you were going to ask me about, and I thought, good heavens, yes, it's a long time ago. Before I did a psychoanalytic training, I did philosophy. I did philosophy at university, and then I taught a bit. And so I was talking to a friend who was a philosopher who was putting together a book that various people were writing chapters for about integrity. And I'd been telling him about life on the neonatal unit. And he said, will you write a chapter on integrity for my book? So that was how I came to write that chapter. And in a way, it was the beginning of the book. In a way, it was the kind of seed from which the book came. I suppose, I do feel rather sort of distant from it. I thought, I ought to go back and read the chapter again.
I should have given you more warning.
I suppose I think that one of our tasks in life is to know what's our own and what isn't, and what we're splitting off and what we're denying, and what trying to integrate into ourselves unwanted parts of ourselves. So not all our feelings in the neonatal unit are nice ones. You know, sometimes we come up against feelings in ourselves that we don't like very much. They're there. And if we can find a home for them, own them, and feel all right about them, we're not so much in danger of splitting them off into other people. So we may feel anger with mothers, and if we can know about that in ourselves, we can then find our compassion and ability to listen to all kinds of stories that need to be told in a accepting way. But also, not all feelings towards babies are pleasant ones. For instance, when the baby's crying, it's withdrawing, we may feel, I remember one nurse saying she felt like throwing the baby out of the window. It's not an uncommon feeling. And if there can be a holding atmosphere in the unit of then we can be more giving and accepting and holding of the parents and the babies and each other.
I mean, in some ways, it sounds like that is a big part of your role in a way, whether it's with parents, helping them with what they feel, acknowledging and accepting a lot, even if it isn't pleasant, or within the unit, that was a big part of really what you were doing, is helping people to own what they felt so that it didn't play out in more destructive ways, and so that people in some ways could work through it.
That's right. Yeah, I think that's right. But I think that's the kind of task in life all the way through.
Right.
How do we, that you get to some sort of equilibrium feeling, and then something comes along that disturbs it. Now, do we just say, no, I don't want that, or can we find some way to think about it? And that thing that comes along to disturb one may come from outside, but it may also come from inside. One may have a very unpleasant thought. Now, can one integrate that and let it have its place amongst the other thoughts, feelings?
Maggie, out of interest, I mean, because I mean, if I think about in South Africa, we were only just beginning to kind of try and find a place for psychologists in a kind of neonatal ICU and develop the kinds of skills required to work in that kind of place. And I think it's been happening in our governmental systems for many years, but certainly in our private systems, we were only just beginning to see that there is a place for that. We're really in our infancy. Has that become more prevalent in London in terms of neonatal ICUs having kind of a psychological presence?
Well, it's a bit like the housework. You're never finished with it. You do it, and then you think, I've done that. And then you turn around and it needs doing again. So I think with our work, it's both wanted and valued, and also denigrated. So if there are cuts, and in this country, that's the name of the moment, that will be the first thing to go.
Right.
So there was a great flourishing, really, in the health service of multidisciplinary thinking, an idea of seeing the person as a whole person. How do we manage to talk to each other? Psychologists to talk to psychotherapists and psychiatrists, to know that we need each other, and we need to have to integrate our different approaches, and to do that work. There's less opportunity for it. There's always a kind of it seems to me that you kind of manage that, and then it breaks up, and you have to struggle for it again. So I wouldn't say it's all thriving and much better now.
But perhaps that the part of our role is to continually fight for the importance of what we're trying to do, in a way.
It has to be, yeah.
Okay. Maggie, thank you so much for speaking to us.
It's my pleasure.
Okay, and certainly we will be in touch very soon.
Good. Okay.
Thanks, Maggie. Keep well.
Great.
Bye.